Chinese jets intercepted a U.S. warship in the South China Sea. The U.S. response was immediate. The South China Sea's long been a hotspot for geopolitical tension, combining strategic and economic interests of several nations. In recent years, this tension has only grown, especially between China and the United States. Not only is the South China Sea a vital artery for global trade, about a third of all maritime cargo passes through these waters annually, but it's also rich in energy sources, making it a target of territorial disputes. The increased tension is most evident in the frequent incidents between U.S. and Chinese military ships and aircraft. In this video, we'll explore how American forces respond in these situations and whether such encounters could escalate into a full-scale conflict, potentially even nuclear. Spoiler alert, they could. By the end of this video, you'll have learned a lot of interesting facts about these high-stakes confrontations. Military tension in the South China Sea is rising exponentially. China, strengthening its military bases on artificial islands, frequently flexes its muscles through large-scale exercises and by controlling maritime routes. The U.S., on the other hand, conducts freedom of navigation operations, sending ships through disputed areas to reject Chinese territorial claims. Although these actions are routine, they carry a high risk of direct confrontation between two global powers. To understand how this tension could escalate into a full-scale conflict, it's crucial to examine the deeper causes and mechanisms of this confrontation. The main cause is economic interest. The South China Sea is one of the world's most critical trade routes, with over $3 trillion worth of goods passing through annually. For China, controlling this region ensures the safety of its sea routes and access to the rich oil and gas reserves under the seabed. For the U.S., the South China Sea is a key component of the global trade and energy network. The second cause is the U.S. need to contain China's growing influence. China claims nearly 90% of the South China Sea based on the so-called Nine-Dash Line, which is not recognized by the international community. In 2016, an international arbitration court in The Hague ruled that China has no legal basis for these claims, but Beijing refused to accept the ruling. China continues to build military facilities on the disputed Paracel and Spratly Islands and even creates new artificial islands, prompting pushback from other coastal nations like Vietnam, the Philippines, and Malaysia. For the U.S., losing influence in the South China Sea would be far more catastrophic for its role as a global leader than, say, Ukraine losing its war with Russia. The reason is simple. The U.S. would be conceding ground directly to its main strategic competitor in the very Asian region that's already become the world's economic powerhouse and will only grow stronger in the 21st century. The White House understands this very well and will go to great lengths to prevent this scenario from happening, even if it means full-scale conflict with China. So what is the most likely path to escalation between the two countries? It's probably an incident at sea between the U.S. Navy and Chinese ships or an aerial incident involving military aircraft. Unfortunately, such incidents are happening more frequently and can be extremely dangerous. Let's look at a recent example. In February 2023, during a patrol mission in international airspace over the South China Sea, a Chinese J-11 fighter performed a dangerous maneuver near a U.S. Air Force RC-135 reconnaissance plane. The incident occurred at about 30,000 feet or 9 kilometers over the South China Sea. The J-11 came within 20 feet, about 6 meters, of the RC-135, forcing the U.S. plane to fly through the Chinese jet's wake turbulence, which poses a serious risk of collision. This maneuver is considered highly aggressive and unsafe by international aviation safety standards. The U.S. described the Chinese pilot's actions as dangerous and unprofessional, emphasizing that such incidents increase the risk of accidental military confrontation. China, on the other hand, stated that the U.S. aircraft was operating near Chinese territory and that these reconnaissance missions threatened China's national security. Beijing insisted that the J-11's actions were meant to ensure the country's safety. As we can see, both sides have polar opposite views of what happened, making compromise unlikely anytime soon. How does the U.S. crew react? How does the crew of a U.S. military ship react when approached by a Chinese military aircraft or ship? The key is that the crew must follow strictly established protocols aimed at avoiding collisions, maintaining safety, and preventing escalation. Here's how the process works. First, the U.S. ship detects the approaching Chinese vessel or aircraft using radar and other sensors. Officers on the bridge track the direction, speed, and course of the approaching object to assess any potential threat. As the Chinese ship or aircraft gets closer, the U.S. crew attempts to make contact through international communication channels, usually using VHF frequencies, 30 to 300 megahertz. The messages are standardized to clarify intentions. For example, the crew might say, "Chinese vessel, this is a U.S. destroyer. We are operating in international waters. Please alter your course to avoid collision." In addition to voice communication, the ships may use light signals, flags, or other visual cues to confirm actions and request a course change. If the Chinese ship or aircraft continues to approach and poses a collision risk, the U.S. vessel may change its course or speed to avoid the dangerous situation. This can mean making a sharp turn or slowing down. Such incidents have happened before. One occurred recently, in June 2023. A Chinese military ship approached the U.S. destroyer USS John S. McCain in the Taiwan Strait and crossed its path at a distance of just 150 yards, about 137 meters. The USS John S. McCain had to alter course to avoid a collision. Earlier in September 2018, the U.S. destroyer USS Decatur was conducting a freedom of navigation operation near the disputed Spratly Islands, which China claims as its territorial waters. The Chinese destroyer Luoyang closed in on the USS Decatur to within just 45 yards, about 41 meters, forcing the U.S. ship to change course to avoid a collision. If a Chinese ship or aircraft continues its aggressive approach or shows hostile intent, the U.S. crew may raise their combat readiness. Weapon systems are put on standby and the crew prepares for any possible action. Depending on the situation, crew members may be assigned to battle stations. Hatches are sealed and orders are given to prepare for potential damage. At the same time, every move by the Chinese vessel or aircraft is carefully documented, including video and photographic evidence from the deck, recordings of radio communications, and logs of actions taken on the bridge. This data is later used to analyze the incident, possibly file diplomatic protests, and conduct military investigations. Electronic and intelligence specialists may also use the ship systems to record the electromagnetic spectrum or radar signatures of the Chinese object, which can be useful for future analysis. Additionally, the ship's commander must promptly report to higher authorities, such as the U.S. Navy Regional Command. Incident details and the ship's actions are transmitted via satellite communication. If necessary, support from nearby U.S. military forces, such as carrier groups or aircraft in the area, can be requested. But what if the Chinese ship or aircraft doesn't stop its aggressive behavior? For example, what if a Chinese vessel clearly attempts a ramming maneuver, ignoring all warnings, or otherwise demonstrates aggression, such as positioning itself in a potentially offensive stance, threatening the U.S. ship? In this case, the U.S. commander may order warning shots to be fired, and if the aggression continues, authorize the use of lethal force. Use of lethal force is a last resort applied only when there's an immediate threat to the lives of the crew or the ship. The decision to open fire is based on the following circumstances. 1. Right to self-defense. According to international law and U.S. military rules of engagement, lethal force may be used if there's an imminent threat to life or safety. This includes situations where an unknown vessel or aircraft is preparing to attack, such as pointing weapons at the U.S. ship or aircraft, or performing maneuvers that strongly indicate an attack is imminent. 2. Aggressive actions by an opposing vessel or aircraft. If a foreign ship or aircraft initiates hostile actions, such as firing weapons, launching missiles, approaching to ram a U.S. ship, or any other threatening action, the crew has the right to respond with lethal force to neutralize the threat. 3. Threat of armed attack. If an approaching vessel or aircraft is found to have armed weapons ready to fire, missiles, torpedoes, or artillery, lethal force can be used to prevent an attack. Any decision to open fire, especially with lethal intent, always follows established protocols. U.S. commanders are required to assess the threat by analyzing the behavior and maneuvers of the approaching vessel or aircraft. Before resorting to force, they must attempt to establish visual, auditory, or radio contact. U.S. military ships use international radio frequencies to warn unknown vessels. Less lethal measures, such as evasive maneuvers or warning shots, are always preferred if possible to prevent escalation. All actions involving the use of force are carefully documented for subsequent investigation and diplomatic handling of the incident. Escalation and the possibility of conflict. Now let's simulate a situation where an incident results in casualties. What would happen then? Could the loss of life push the U.S. and China over the brink and into a full-scale armed conflict? In this case, several crucial factors must be considered. First, the international situation at the time of the conflict. Second, which side suffered casualties. Third, the extent of the damage inflicted on both sides. The global tension between the U.S. and China at the time of the incident will be the determining factor in how the international community responds. If the tension is already high, as it is now, a deadly incident could be the spark that ignites a more serious escalation. The United Nations and other international organizations could find themselves deadlocked as both sides exchange accusations, complicating diplomatic attempts to de-escalate. Second, which side suffers casualties matters. If American soldiers are killed, Washington may react sharply. The U.S. tends to show little tolerance for losing its citizens or servicemen abroad, especially under conditions of aggression. The American government could come under pressure from public opinion and politicians demanding immediate action, which would lead to an increased military presence in the region. If Chinese personnel or civilians are killed, Beijing would likely escalate its rhetoric on defending national sovereignty and may include shows of force or mobilizing resources for a response. Third, the level of damage is not just about the number of deaths or injuries, but also the political, strategic, and economic consequences. If the incident is limited to a few casualties and minimal equipment damage, both sides may prefer a controlled de-escalation, using the incident as an opportunity for diplomatic dialogue. However, if the damage is significant, such as the destruction of a large ship or aircraft, this could provoke a forceful response. After an incident, both countries will face a difficult question. Are they willing to risk a full-scale war which could involve nuclear arsenals? Here, fear of catastrophic consequences comes into play. Nuclear powers generally avoid direct confrontations due to the risk of uncontrollable escalation. The Cuban Missile Crisis of 1962 serves as a reminder that even the slightest miscalculation can lead to disaster. Similar logic might deter both the U.S. and China from taking further steps if they find themselves on the brink of a direct conflict. However, bloodshed creates a situation where political leaders come under immense domestic pressure for retaliatory actions. The death of servicemen almost always demands justice, which in a climate of military tension can lead to unpredictable outcomes. Leaders of both countries would face a dilemma: maintain face in front of the public and allies, potentially triggering a full-scale war that could lead to nuclear strikes, or pursue diplomatic resolution despite the pressure. It must be acknowledged that the fear of nuclear conflict among politicians has diminished. Discussions about the use of tactical nuclear weapons being acceptable without causing global catastrophe are becoming more common. Russia's already altered its nuclear doctrine, significantly lowering the threshold for the use of nuclear weapons. It's very possible that other nuclear nations will follow suit. Therefore, we must conclude that the risk of intense military escalation, including nuclear strikes as a result of the incidents we described, is far from zero. Do you think an incident in the South China Sea could lead to nuclear conflict? Let us know your thoughts in the comments. We'd love your likes and subscriptions to our channel. Thank you for watching, and see you again soon.